Hey there, my name is Shane Craddock, and this is the Inner Edge podcast, where I share a different take on how to lead and live a sustainable, high-performance life. Over the course of different episodes, I'm going to challenge the belief that tension, stress, and struggle are essential to success and creativity. My experience is that there's an easier way, there's a better way, and indeed there's an essential way that we need to explore for the times that we live in. So let's go ahead, let's jump in and explore. For this episode, let me start with something that maybe sounds obvious, but I believe it quietly runs most people's lives, and usually not for the better. It's that you don't struggle, in my view, because you have insecure thinking, or you don't struggle because you feel doubt, pressure, frustration, or hesitation. Really, we can struggle because in certain moments, usually unwittingly, we treat thinking as much more important than it should be and much more true than it probably is. And that one distinction, to me, explains why, for example, you could be clear and present in one particular meeting and yet blocked and tense in the next meeting. Or why you might be calm, clear and collected with one person, but just a few minutes later, tight, angry, frustrated with somebody else. Or a common one, I think, is with a lot of people that I have spoken to over the years, is that maybe they would see themselves as being very effective and speaking and communicating one-to-one. But when it goes through a group or a public domain, they get constrained and tense. Now, in those situations, the way I look at it is nothing new has shown up, but their thinking changed. Maybe you might call it insecure thinking came in, or thinking that causes interference or tension or stress. And that thinking comes in like clouds, but for most people, we'll give that thinking a different level of authority or control without necessarily realizing it. Most people don't realize this is even happening. So this is something that I think is universal. And I think there's layers and layers to this. Certainly that's what I've seen for myself. And in essence, what I'm saying is a thought doesn't become a problem when it appears in your mind. It only becomes a problem when we take it seriously. So the thought might be loud, but that doesn't mean it has to be a problem. It might even be uncomfortable or could be repetitive. It's only a problem when we believe that it's valid or that it's relevant or that it's true. Now, just as it happened, I like when synchronicity happens around me all the time, but I was preparing for this episode, I was going through some, I was thinking through what am I going to say. And then I got this, just before I turned off my phone, I got a call. And it turned out to be one of those crank calls with a guy whose name was David, but clearly it wasn't his real name, I'd say, because he certainly wasn't from, his language was given him in a way, or his accent. He said he was from Microsoft, and the usual story of there's a problem with your internet, there's a problem with your account. And of course, I don't have anything with Microsoft, as it turns out. So, we all know these particular calls, and there's people trying to hoodwink you basically to get your credit card details, fraud you in some way. And obviously, there were times where I might just play with this guy and lead him down the garden path myself and then just, have some fun. But I wasn't in the mood for it, let's say, and I was focused on getting this done. So I just entered the call and said, thanks very much, have a good day, but it ain't going to work. Now, weirdly, synchronistically, I'm saying the same thing in terms of your thinking. That your thinking often comes in trying to hoodwink you. But, if we know that something's coming in, here we go, it's easy just to kind of go, no, not today, like I said to my friend David. But we can do the same thing with our mind. But for most of us, we don't see it in the same way. So the reason those crank calls exist is because some people do get caught out. That's what keeps these fraudsters going. But it happens much more frequently with our minds. Our thinking is that fraudster, is that hoodwinker, if that's a word. Now, in my life, I've been in a situation over the last couple of months where I've had to get involved in doing some things that I found difficult and tricky. But recently I met somebody who actually loves doing the things that I've been finding difficult. And I was very curious about them. And I asked them, how do you see these activities that you're doing? And they just said with a smile on their face, oh no, I was born to do this work. Now, without a doubt, if I'm thinking about things like, getting bookkeeping done or accounts, that's not attractive to my mind. But some people love doing accounts and bookkeeping. And you might think, okay, that's just them and I'm somebody different, then that's fine. But if you look deeper, there's a universal truth underneath that. And really what they're pointing to is they have different thinking about the activities compared to me or other people. But that presents an opportunity. It also points to what I'm talking about. Now, if we go back to speaking one-to-one versus talking to a group, when you're speaking one-to-one, you might well, and I can say this with my own experience of life working one-to-one with people and then working with groups, I'd often have an insecure thought or a distracting thought when I'm talking with somebody, but I wouldn't let them interfere. I might see them, I might even feel them, but I just ignore them because I know they're not helpful. But earlier on in my career, when I started working with groups, those same thoughts would come in, but then they would get more of a hold on me because I treated those thoughts as more meaningful. Oh no, there must be some truth to them. And suddenly then I was taken over by the fraudster in my mind, and they started dictating my tone, my behavior, my presence, and ultimately my performance. And that's the hidden cost. The moment you give your thinking status, more status than it should have, then it starts calling the shots. And in that way, your thinking becomes the puppeteer and we become the puppet. And I think most people, most leaders, most performers don't realize that this is happening. That they'll often think they're being responsible or dealing with reality or maybe just being careful. But what they're actually doing is outsourcing their authority, their inner authority to their thinking. And that's, for example, one of the key elements that I point to in my book, The Inner CEO, which is, don't let your thinking dictate the show. Don't let your mind dictate the show. You have to be the boss of your mind. Now, part of it is that awareness of, oh, I actually should and be encouraged to question my thinking, but also just detach from it, particularly if it's bringing with it a feeling of insecurity. And insecurity would include things like stress, doubt, frustration, pressure. It's not helpful. So maybe you could think of it like this, you can be in a cafe having a conversation and maybe there's a lot of background noise and you can still have a great conversation because you're just there. You're in the moment. Or you can decide that the noise is distracting and then you can lose the conversation and connection with the person completely. The noise didn't really change anything. It's your relationship to your thinking about the noise is what changed. And that's how your thinking works. So in some situations in your work in your life, you'll hear thought like background noise. It doesn't really affect you. But in other situations, you treat it like a major warning siren. Like same thinking, but a different impact. I find that fascinating. The difference is our relationship to our thinking. Now, people will often assume, and I can do this myself, well, if I'm feeling this, it must mean something. It must be true because I'm feeling it. That's my truth. But the reality is, if you've listened to anything of what I've said over these podcasts since I started, that if you're feeling something, the only reason you're feeling something is because of your thinking. Now, that thinking could be unconscious. It often is. But feeling something doesn't mean it's true. And it doesn't mean it deserves your attention or your obedience. And when you stop automatically granting thinking importance or more importance than is deserved, clarity doesn't need to be created then or gained. It just reappears because it was never gone. It was innate. It was just blocked by the clouds of thought in your mind. Certainly that's relevant in Ireland at the moment where there's unprecedented cloud over the last few weeks and unprecedented rain. But the sun will eventually reemerge. The same thing to do with your mind. Clarity will reemerge if we can just step back and at least be open to kind of going, oh, do you know what? Maybe this thought isn't true at all. I don't have to believe it. Now, it doesn't mean you're the Pollyanna putting your head in the sand. Not at all. In fact, actually, once you do it that way, the way I'm talking about, it actually brings you more back into the room. You're more present. You're here. You feel better. And so you can deal with reality actually more effectively because you're less stressed. And I think this matters as a point because leadership, performance, to me, it doesn't really break down under pressure. What it breaks down under is misplaced respect for your thinking. Pressure, as they say, is for tired, but actually there is some truth in that. And when your thinking comes in and maybe blocks or fogs up your mind, you don't lose access to your natural intuitive intelligence, your inner wisdom. You just temporarily defer it. But the cost will show up as perhaps over preparing for something instead of just listening, managing yourself too much instead of just engaging with the situation or the person that's right in front of you right now, or tightening or tensing up when openness, presence is required. And I think the irony is that the person who performs best isn't the one with less thinking as such. It's the one who doesn't treat every thought that they have as an instruction or the truth. They've learned, usually often unconsciously, that a thought is just information, but it's not a command. You don't have to take it as true. Now, when that penny drops, when that shift happens, effort drops in a very quick way, easy way. And when that happens, clarity rises, presence rises, and your performance rises as well. So just a simple question to maybe take with you today and into the week is even to write this out and just think about it once or twice a day. Okay, am I giving the thinking that I'm having authority? Or can I just notice it? Just notice it as if it was just information that may not be true, that most likely isn't true. And that's it. You don't have to argue with the thought or thinking. You don't have to replace it. You don't have to analyze it or ask, where is this coming from? Why is it here? No, that's all a waste of time in my experience. Just notice whether you promoted your thinking to the decision maker as opposed to your awareness, the bit that I would call the inner CEO. And the moment you don't give authority away like that, then clarity, your inner clarity, your innate clarity has room to come in again. And you'll find that the thinking that you were trying to manage, or the situation you were trying to manage because of your thinking, was never really the actual problem. The actual problem was being hoodwinked by your thinking, just like my friend David, who was ringing from, apparently, even though it wasn't, Microsoft. And I, to close out, was thinking of that phrase that goes something like, ultimately, if you can find the humor in a situation, you win. But underneath that, it's kind of linked to what I'm talking about, is that, when you can detach from unhelpful thinking that's causing you stress, which isn't always easy, but it is possible, what you'll find is that you win. You win more because you have that inner space and clarity to move in a better direction. Hope that lands. Ciao for now.